my pleasure to be sitting here with the incredible Cat Tully from the School of International Futures. And my name is Taylor Hawkins from Foundations for Tomorrow. And I'm incredibly excited to spend this next session talking with you about an impactful pathway to the Summit of the Future. Now we're going to dig a bit more in a few minutes into everything that the Summit of the Future entails. The wonderful Cat Tully will share much of her wisdom on that note. But I'd love to set the scene a bit in this room because I know if anyone is like me, you've been on absolute sponge mode the last day and a half and you've probably absorbed a hell of a lot of information. I think I told a lot of people over lunch that my brain feels like spaghetti. So if you're feeling that way, you're among friends, it's a safe space. But my invitation to you for this session is to take all of that juicy goodness that you've soaked up in the last day and a half and all of the wisdom that you came to this event with, roll up your sleeves and dig into some action. Because I know that I'm really craving that after seeing all the challenges, the opportunities, the potential, the collaborations in this space. And so that's what we want to provide here, is some tangible outcomes, something that we can really anchor into this place, that we can rally behind, and that we can revisit again here next year. But before we dive in, I'm about to hand over to Kat. I'd love to get a feel for the incredible diversity and the ripe fertile ground for collaboration that we have. So if you're here from national government, can you raise your hand for me? Great. If you're here from civil society, give me a little wave. Great, proud hand, I like it. The civil society hands were stronger than government. I don't know what that tells you, but we've got some confidence in civil society. If you're here from academia, excellent, great. If you're here from business, international organizations, anyone? Our UNs, our UNDPs, amazing. So you can see that we have so many different perspectives to bring to the table. And that sets us up for really great success with what our ambitions are for this session. So number one, information sharing. As I said, the amount of wisdom that walked into this room should not be underestimated. And we want to bring that together. It's almost a perfect shaped room for this. We want to give it all into the middle so that we can share and so that we can grow together. We also want to foster that connection. We want to bridge those gaps and help to address some of the fractures that exist in this space. I was talking earlier today about how there's so many different schools of thought in this area, and if we focus so much on the differences, and there is value there, but if we get trapped there, we'll lose the opportunity to really rally together as we come into this critical global moment. And that's why we want to, number three, invite action. And so that brings us to a bit more detail on the Summit of the Future. Wonderful, Kat, over to you.
Thanks so much. And Taylor, thank you so much for inspiring us all. I think that just summed it up so brilliantly, right? Okay, I'm going to invite some of you who are standing at the door to please come and sit down. You will be working a little bit in breakout groups in a second, but perhaps I'd spent the first 5 minutes chatting to you a little bit about what, from an outsider's civil society perspective, but from someone who has done futures with the UN over the past 10 to 15 years, what's going on perhaps in a little bit. But first of all, I'm going to invite you all to do one little quick exercise. Please put your hand up if you do work on futures. I'm kind of expecting everybody to put their hand up, right? Okay, right, okay. Please keep your hand up if you work on, everybody please keep your hand up. Okay, keep your hand up if you do work on futures and policy, whether it's local, national, international level. Okay, a couple of hands came down. Keep your hands up if you'd heard of the Summit of the Future before the DFF event. That's a really great result and basically means that in this room there's people who are really mobilized about it. That's great. Keep your hand up if you understand what it is.
That's what a real dropout
And the opportunity. Okay, we have some experts in the room that we can lean into. And who's actually working on it? Okay, fantastic, right. And again, there are some brilliant people in this room from UN Global Pulse, UNESCO, UNICEF, UNDP, the Futures Lab, the Secretary General's Office, and in fact, I'm going to invite Clara at the end, who's involved in this, to actually share a few words right at the end and perhaps to share how she might take some of this conversation back. But so here's, I think, what seems to be going on, and the story, which you'll all know because you're all pretty much informed about this, is that this started in 2020 with the 75th anniversary of the UN and the member states asking the Secretary General to come forward with a common agenda for change, which was then duly delivered in 2021, that was a very rich, progressive and very exciting outline of what changes might need to happen for the years ahead out in global governance. And there was a whole plethora of different recommendations that you can see above. And one of the key ideas was to have a summit of the future. The summit of the future is going to take place in September next year, 21st, 23rd of September, and in fact has now ended up being sandwiched between the SDG summit that happened last year and also the social summit that is going to happen the year after. So throughout our common agenda, you have foresight endeavours that are really embedded, and the Secretary General and the whole of the UN, led by a lot of people in this room, have done a really great job to disseminate futures thinking and capability throughout the UN system and the member states that they work with. So this is the journey that we've gone, and it's interesting how foresight is both critical to turbocharge the SDG achievements out to 2030, to then look out over the next 25 years and beyond and say, what are the challenges and opportunities ahead? And then with the social summit, situate it again at the level of the human, of the individual, of the personal, because what does all this change actually mean for us as global citizens in the jobs that we have in the face of turbulence? How do we actually have an intergenerational contract within our governments and wider society that is at one with the environments that we're in and the changes ahead? So it really kind of works fantastically well as this kind of sequence of events. And in addition, what you're seeing at the same time, of course, is this growth of interest in foresight and innovations at a national level. So you have the potential for a two-level game, if you like, where you've got the great innovations happening at domestic levels, in parliaments, in civil society, bringing in future generations commissioners to feed into the high ambition at the UN level, and also the fact that there's a moment in time where for the first time really governments are coming together to talk about future generations and the future in an international summit can actually then also provide a coordinating mechanism. But, and there is always a but, the interesting thing is that the intergovernmental process will have 5 aspects to the pact, to the written declaration that is being written. And there is also an annex, a couple of annexes, but the one that's relevant to us here, I think, is the Declaration for Future Generations, which will be annexed. And this pact has got 5 aspects to it. The one that's particularly leaning in on youth, on future generations, is the one that is least known about. So you have at the global level, you have a series of global civil societies, UN officials, and quite frankly, member state negotiators who know loads about international financial reform, who know about peace building, global governance, but the understanding of what this kind of concept of foresight and future generations, what that means tangibly, especially in the kind of politics of the UN, is not known at all. So you've got that, and at the same time, you've got a whole community at the national level who are doing such fascinating work, and yet they are totally unsighted on how do you actually connect that into the UN conversations, feeding in through the ministries of foreign affairs that actually then send instructions to the UN delegation. So that is the interesting issue. We have an information gap and we have a connection gap, and putting that all on turbocharge, there is very little time to do that. So we have, together with lots of other people, including people in the room and others inside the Futures community and others, have suggested that what we need is to disseminate this information very quickly, to enable to kind of say that there's a narrative that we can bring some optimism to conversations about the future at a global level, instead of it always being about the poly-crisis, but also then have a very targeted set of ideas that we can disseminate and go, here are some 9 ideas that you can send to your Ministry of Foreign Affairs to actually request them to put it in the text. So, and then finally, we suggested some kind of pledge that might actually act as a kind of mechanism to inspire and infect others to show that we are part of a movement that really care about making a high ambition summit of the future, and using this as well to drive and support the innovations that are happening nationally. So that's the opportunity, I think, that we were talking about, and perhaps this is the right time to turn to the conversations.
Absolutely. So as I said, as much as for those who may be reclining on the base here and you're leaning into a bit of an afternoon slump nap, I'm sorry to tell you that's not going to happen for you today. We're about to start moving around because we want to roll our sleeves up. We want to hear from you. As I can see, a few of you are already scanning this QR code. It will take you to the current draft of the pledge and to this statement of ambition for the Summit of the Future, because as Kat so incredibly explained, we have this incredible moment with eyes coming from every sector looking at it that has the potential to be transformational, but it also has the potential to be, and sorry to anyone offended by this in the room, a miraculous flash in the pan that passes. And so it is our job to surround that moment with action, to surround it with ambition, to surround it with coalition building that has the ability to carry that potential into transformational change. And so that's what we really want to crowdsource in this session. Is we're going to break you into, I think, 5 groups. We'll have a group in each corner and maybe one collecting here. I know we're a bit more squishy on space here, but we will be spending 15 minutes diving into 3 really important questions that we think need to inform how we all approach the Summit for the Future. So number 1, we really need to understand what's already going on. So what is happening in your country? I've heard so many of the other speakers reference to the amazing diversity that is in this event. So what's happening in your country? What do we need to know about? What do we need to make sure that we are amplifying so that people see what's possible and how localization is working in this space? And then what do you think should be happening? What would you like to see happen in your country? So that's question number 1. We will keep these up here for the whole time. You don't need to memorize, you don't need to write them down. For the good students in the room, I could see starting to jot them down, do not fear. Question 2, what action should be taken at an international level, and how can we most effectively coordinate existing and emerging efforts? You know, I and so many people in this room are a great example of people working hard in this space, and then you meet people who are actually working either in the same geography, in the same area, and you've never heard of each other. And that's something that we need to overcome. So what's already happening that we can amplify, and how should we be coordinating these incredible existing and emerging efforts? And then number 3, which are the key countries and actors that we feel need to be part of this conversation? And I think for most of us in this room, we probably know a pretty immediate list of that, and we know those who are being overlooked at the moment. So the really critical piece there, and back to the rolling up our sleeves and what does action look like, how should we be bringing them into this conversation? What is the most effective and inclusive and just way to do that? So with that being said, we did our best. It was quite a quick turnover in the room, so it's kind of a scavenger hunt to start with. Number 1, you have a few pieces of paper that you were handed by the incredible team here, so thank you so much for the help on that. So you should have a pen in those, but if anyone feels like taking on their leadership role in this conversation, there's also some big pads and Post-its. If that is near you, you have now been voluntold as a facilitator, so please grab it, take the Post-its, take the marker. I'll walk around just in case any of them were missed. And you're going to dive in with your group for 15 minutes. Logic would indicate that maybe you spend 5 minutes on each question, but do not let me hamper your creativity. And you're going to dive in and capture as much information from these questions, because I can tell you my evening tonight, it's going to be a party. I'm going to be laying in my hotel room with all of these pieces of paper on the floor, processing them and seeing how we can build them into this statement a bit more. So please know, this information is going somewhere. You writing it down is genuinely valuable, and nice and tidy handwriting will be appreciated by me late tonight. So with that, please commence your 15 minutes, and if you have, there we go, there's a facilitator right there. Please grab those big pads if you can see them, and away you go. I'm slowly looking, okay, we're gonna do this like school teacher strategy. Hands up if you can see my hands up. Okay, great. Have I got hands up? There we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, it worked. You see, school teachers know what's up. They know how to do this. Okay, so what we're going to do now is we want this to stay dynamic. We don't have the intention of being the key speakers in this space, and the hush really reaches that corner over here, and that'll be really helpful. I'm recovering from a spot of pneumonia a few weeks ago, so be kind to me and my voice.
Guilt them into it.
Pardon?
Guilt them into
guilt.
it.
You see, I tried a few other strategies, and guilt seems to be the one that worked. So we're going to spend the next 10 minutes hearing from these groups. So any final thoughts you have, keep writing those down, because as I said, we will be collecting those, they will go to use. But we'd love to open that to the room. One of our wonderful colleagues from the forum has a microphone that will materialize near you. And it's not a hand up to speak, but a general wave, creating some attention to yourself if you'd like to share. Jack, you look ready to go. Was that a wave or was that a thinking hand? Oh, that was a hand. Okay, great. Who would like to share what came out of your discussions? Yes, Claudette.
Yeah, so about the first question, we were discussing that we are not very aware of what's happening at a national level, and this is all come to the fact that there's not a lot of awareness in a domestic level or also with local NGOs, grassroots organizations. Something that we would like to see happen is some participated democracy exercises where citizens can start having a conversation on what is actually their priorities for the future, so that in that case, the delegations can share their insights at a UN level. The second thing about the second question on what action should be taken, we were discussing on linking the SDGs with futures, because it's still something that it's very abstract and that we're still working in silos. So something that is intersectional and that is meant to create collaboration will be great. And as for the third thing, we definitely agree that having some powerful countries on our side will be beneficial. For example, members from the G7, G20, EU, US, China, etc. But there's also a need for balancing these considerations with young countries and future majority countries overall, because these type of actors will also play a key role in our future, and I think that will be it. Oh, and the private sector as well.
Juliana from Parque Explora Science Center in Colombia. So, for the first question, we in some places like in Colombia and South America, we're building futuristic skills for youth and for vulnerable people, not like from futurist to futurist, but from futurist to like community. And we think these local experiences should be in the forum. We discussed about having like a local futurist or a local commission that is diverse, that will be involved in the forum. And we wondered, there are many problems that need to be solved and will be solved in the future. How does the summit contribute to each of them? For the second question, which was, I cannot see without my glasses, what actions should be taken, something like that. So we think that the people that are planning the summit, they know everything about it, but like human beings in different countries, they have no idea that this is going to happen and are not connected, so that's an important thing that has to be done. We know that UN normally cannot mandate and tell you have to do this, but we think that there has to be an accountability in what is spoken there. We also think that this would be a great opportunity for the summit to plant a seed where things are not organized as they're usually organized in the UN by countries, because these correspond to very individual interests. So it could be a pilot to start thinking differently. And in the third question, who should we invite? We think that because there were two of us that work in science centers of the future, we think we should invite science centers and museums. We should invite forums, which is a network of museums of the future. We should invite the global south. Usually when we imagine the future, it's imagined from the north, and we should invite south, and we should invite, in that sense, science fiction, climate fiction, and sur fiction, which is fiction from the south. Okay.
Hi, my name is Jack Obellis. I represent UN Foundation as a Next Generation Fellow and a UNICEF Youth Foresight Fellow. I might feel a little bit grumpy, but I'm a little bit conflicted with question 2. So question 2 for me was, I'm trying to think about how prescriptive do we become, that there are a set of these models. These are the top 5 things that you should see in each country when it comes to future generations. Now that's a bit prescriptive, that's kind of us telling the world what they need to do. So that's the one side, versus a far more organic, agile kind of approach, which is up to each country to work through. The confliction sits when we're trying to then monitor the progress or measure something, and accountability, and have some consistency in how we measure. So I think the question around measuring how we do this needs to sit somewhere, that we know we're doing good. How do we know we're achieving something here? So I don't know if there's a balance between finding something that is prescriptive versus giving that freedom on the other side. I also think that we need to very fast collectively agree around terminology. So we need to very quickly appreciate what we mean by future generations, that it's not the same as youth. And if it has taken the member states quite a long time, and probably still taking a long time, to appreciate that distinction and other terminologies and definitions that will come with future generations. Until we get that, it's going to be very hard for us to get further into the detail about how we then deliver. The third confliction, and I'll end it just on three, is I think that we have quite the challenge in this Pact for the Future, in that we are looking to address the chapter on youth and future generations as a movement of people interested in that space, as well as the energy to try and influence the Declaration for Future Generations. So we've got two things that we need to do, which is not the same for everybody else in other sectors who may only want to influence the peace particular chapter, or I'm being simple about it. So I think we need to find a way of coalition building and understanding which one are we targeting and how we're going to target those two things. And it might be separate in terms of the approaches, but we've got to find the strategy around where do we put our energy and where do we find our USPs in that. So sorry, I'm feeling a little grumpy.
Hi everyone, I'm Alicia Richens, one of the NGFP fellows. We had a cool conversation that's really focused on question one and a little bit on the others. In terms of what's happening, a lot of not much, I don't know, which circles back to the first group talking about a lack of awareness. Though we did have some notes around Bangladesh specifically having more of a focus on foresight and futures in government and having more longer term thinking about visions and planning. What we want to see happen a lot, more stronger cultural dimension. How will people be represented? How will future generations be represented? How to develop more trust between people and their governments and organizations, more democratic spaces for future thinking in every community, including everyone in the conversation, more education and transparency to make that possible, including global perspectives at the local level, alternative measures of success, example, thinking about degrowth, the happiness index, moving beyond GDP, and really focusing on a plurality, a variety of visions, futures with a big S. And we had a big note at the bottom that this should be called the Summit of the Futures. For question two, we talked about the need for better collaboration between international organizations, though that is very difficult. So we talked about promoting more means of collaboration, changing the rules of the game when it comes to international collaboration, and rethinking and reconsidering what global governance looks like. And then finally, around number three, we talked about really including storytellers into the mix, more third sector representation, having more alternative stakeholders and informal networks, and finding ways around the challenges of tapping into those informal networks.
All right, so our group was fairly nicely representative of different continents, different development levels. However, the picture is blurry across. Quite a few of us are not sure what is happening on the agenda and are not sure about the mechanics, right? Who's responsible for what, how do we drive the conversations, and even if we know who the institution is, are the different tracks inside the organization aligned, right? So how are those negotiations happening? In general, we want to learn from different experiences, right? Especially COVID and what happened. It's a moment of convergence rather than anything else. So not to go back into that. However, I think we're definitely aligned, or not definitely, we're aligned that going another route than the institutional one on building coalitions, right? On going. Creating networks across borders are deeply representative of different parts of society. Anyone else would like to add? Sorry, we didn't get to question 2 and 3.
That's okay.
Was that blurry?
Fantastic, and I'll try to compress 6 minutes of comments into 1 minute, so I can hand over to Clara for a few minutes to come up with some thoughts from from her perspective on what she's heard. So effectively, the pledge is indicating interest, and there's lots of information gaps we've just heard, and there's lots of ways that we, as either in civil society, working in member states, working with policymakers, working in member states, there are lots of different avenues to influence, but we often don't know how, and we need to understand and connect around terminology, and we need to share information. So the pledge is a kind of first step at trying to kind of create this common understanding. But really there's 3 stages, and we'll give you the QR code, so don't bother reading it. And also this is a zero draft, right? This is a straw man open for being discussed with you. But I think that there's 3 stages. There's between now and the end of the year, when the zero draft of the pact is going to be submitted into the Namibia and Germany, who are the 2 conveners. Then there is, from the beginning of January until the summit itself, where there are going to be opportunities where there's negotiation by the member states, and civil society is very much feeding in. There'll be various events, and we'll look forward to hearing about Pact Plus. But then, and I think this is what we need to remember, the summit is a means to an end, and in particular the opportunity is what happens after the summit in our countries, and whether we can activate and catalyse transformative anticipatory government and in our countries as a result, whether it's in part the way that we think about future generations and the long term in our parliaments, policy making and civil society. So that's, I think, the name of the prize. In the immediate short term, the member states are going to be talking about future generations on the 13th. This is where I don't have my glasses. 11th? Does that say 11th? Yeah, it's the 11th. Civil society are invited to comment on the 13th, and if you sign up, we will actually circulate all these links. There will be a civil society conference in May, and then of course the pact is in September. There's lots of other dates, including things that are going to emerge. In particular, the Dutch are going, and Jamaicans are going to issue the 2nd track of negotiation for the separate declaration of future generations, as Jack pointed out. There's probably going to be a slightly different and slower negotiating time frame than the one for the pact. But as I said, we'll need to be very nimble, share information, and probably be very, very clear about terminology and very clear about the asks. But the big opportunity, I think, is by having a summit where instead of the future being colonized by older people who are talking about the poly-crisis and distress about the future, where we can actually connect to a realistic optimism about the 25 and 50 years ahead. So at that point, I'm going to hand over to Clara and to invite her to say a couple of words.
Thank you very much first of all, for the session. Thank you to you both, because it's great to have this open discussion on the Summit of the Future and what you hope it's going to be, and how you, civil society and other actors, can bring as much as possible to the table. So I'm just going to say a few words, trying to maybe recap some of the questions that came up and some of the gaps that went into the conversation. So I work in the executive office, of the Secretary General, in the team working on the Summit of the Future, which basically means concretely trying to bridge the gap constantly between member states and what they are doing, what they're advancing, and what they're negotiating at the General Assembly, and other expectations, namely ours, yours, civil society, academia, and what's out there. So we're kind of constantly juggling back and forth between what's out there in terms of thoughts and hopes and what can be actually achieved, including politically, at the General Assembly. And maybe just taking a step back here, I think one of the key roles of the civil society and you actually, and in whatever capacity, is really to a certain extent to show. Your role is to do innovative things, and our role is to show member states that they are actually not new anymore and they can agree on them. Like, we're not asking them to do something crazy. We're just asking them to take stock of the world the way it looks like today and the way it should look like afterwards. So basically what you're doing now should be already agreed upon. And we're kind of stepping in with all these propositions to show them with our common agenda that all these things are there, and it's time for some of the international institutions and texts to maybe change and evolve and take stock. So one of the things that we hope you can do and that you're helping the Secretariat to do is really show what's already going on out there in terms of foresight, in terms of making decisions, in terms of having other actors participating. And I think this forum has been a great occasion for that. I heard a question on the process, on who's in the lead, how things are going to look like. So Kat, thanks a lot for the chronology you showed. I think that's very clear, and you summarized pretty much the key steps. So as you were saying, the process is in the hands of member states for the Pact for the Future. So that's really for the process that's gonna start formally in January. Right now, they are collecting inputs from member states, but also from you until December the 31st. There is a call for participation that should be on our website in about 2 or 3 days at the end of this week. So I invite you to go to our website as regularly as you can and just refresh the page, and it's going to be there very soon. And send your inputs there. Once all these inputs will be collected, they will put together a text, a zero draft declaration, which they will start discussing in January until the summer. We hope that by the summer they will be done, but it might drag on a bit later, depending on how consultations go. But that's for the very formal part. The less formal part is about creating momentum to make sure that once they arrive in September in New York, part of the things they will be there to agree on will actually be already so obvious, because you will have shown that they're already being done, that that's where we'll be. So this is the kind of the second part of the agenda, where to a certain extent we all have much more agency. I'll take a look at my notes on all of the questions, on some of the questions that were asked. I love the point about the Summit of the Futures. Be sure that I will bring it back. I think the reason we speak of the future in singular is because it's to make sure that it's one common future, actually, and not different futures depending on which region we live in. And that's also the whole goal of the Pact for the Future, because some member states complain that it's too broad and it touches on too many areas. And I think the whole goal of recreating a whole pact was to show that every area of decision-making has to be kind of leveraged and thought about differently. So hence the singular in the future. I don't know if I've addressed the key points. I don't want to be too long. That's, I think, the key issues I thought were interesting, important to raise.
Now, I'm aware, thank you so much, Clara. I'm aware that we're running a smidge over time. We're about 2 minutes away from being done. So a few closing comments. Once again, this QR code, if you're feeling a bit overwhelmed by all the dates, all the ideas, all the cues for ways to get involved, the solve for that feeling is to scan the code. Join the pledge, and then we will spoon feed you each step of the way. So you'll then be hearing from us. We'll let you know when you can contribute and how. And really, as we said, like coalition build and be unified in that effort. So our 3 calls to action for you is: number 1, in the lead up to the summit, right now, from this moment, sign the pledge, share it around, help to build this coalition and this unified momentum. Number 2, mobilize and support others. So this isn't just a one way of let's coalition build so we can be supported. Find the other initiatives you can support. To Clara's point, showcase. Our intention here is to be bold and to be innovative and showcase what's happening so that we can support what's happening within the Summit of the Future. And then number 3, nurturing the network. So really leaning into what's possible around the summit. Kat and I spoke just before, and we want to make the bold commitment to support activity on the sidelines of the summit. So not just relying on that formal event being the one place for impact to happen, but investing in creating additional spaces around that for us to make this impact long term. So it's not that flash in the pan, but it is this incredible milestone that it can be for transformational change that can unify and so much to the ambitions of what Clara just mentioned. So once again, I'll close with, if you want to be involved in that, scan the QR code, join the pledge, and then we'll keep you posted on how all of that will come to life. But Kat, any closing comments from you?
No, I think it's just the potential for catalyzing change and coordinating our common endeavors together, both the people in the room, other people in the Futures and Foresight community, but all the other amazing people that are committed to creating change. That's the real opportunity, changing that over the next year.
Absolutely. Well, thank you all for
Thanks.
your time and wishing you a wonderful rest of the forum.
Thank you very much. Great.